We have all heard stories of terrible things that have happened to innocent people. Maybe the loss of all personal possessions in a fire, or the sudden, unexpected death of a loved one, or the discovery of a debilitating disease. And these are just a few of the many ways that suffering hits us. It often strikes without warning, and we struggle to make sense of why we have to go through such painful circumstances. Does the Bible help us make sense of horrible tragedies? I'm Dave Chambers, pastor of Manistee Bible Church. And this Everlasting Truths question is one I have been asked many times. I've given several answers to variations of this question on the Everlasting Truths website, and you can find the links in the description of this video. But how does the Bible help us make sense of senseless tragedies? First, the Bible clearly teaches us the cause of every horrific event. Whether it be a child being killed in a car accident, or mom being diagnosed with terminal cancer, a natural disaster decimating a city, or the year-long battle with an ailment that has killed over 500,000 Americans. Every single tragedy is a result of sin. These things are not natural. They are part of God's judgment on sin. They are part of the curse of sin. I know that's not really comforting, but it is an important starting point to help us understand where these things come from. But what else does the Bible teach us that helps us when dealing with terrible events? And the Bible tells us who God is. But how does that help? Before we dismiss that answer, we need to consider that the character of God is the explanation for tragedy that God gave to Job. Now, do you remember what happened to Job? He was struck by a series of seemingly senseless tragedies. All of his belongings were stolen or destroyed. His 10 children were all killed in one day. He was infected with painful sores that covered his entire body. His wife told him to curse God and die. But at the end of the book of Job, after Job had been pleading for some sort of explanation for what had happened to him, God spoke to Job. Job had suffered incredibly. He suffered far more than most people will ever have to suffer. What did God tell Job? How did God explain Job's suffering? Well, he asked Job a series of questions, over 70 of them. And every single one of them was intended to remind Job that Job is not God. And the Bible makes sense of the senseless by pointing us to the one person who is in charge of everything. And the Bible tells us when we are struck by personal tragedy that God is in control. We're not. We're not in control of the universe. We're not even in control of our own lives. But God is in complete control over all things. The other thing that God's answer to Job teaches us is the incredible care of God. Many of the questions that God asked Job relate to the control and care of the world. He asked him, who feeds the wild animals? Who causes the stars to shine? Who causes the dawn to happen every morning? Who gives rain to the dry ground? Who gives wings to the birds and strength to the horse? All these things are the gift of God. Every good thing on this earth comes from God, and He is constantly at work caring for all the creation. And when that tragedy happens, it is not because God has stopped. It's not because God is cruel, or because God is unconcerned, or because God is powerless to stop it in some way. God is always at work in the world for our good. God never stops caring for His creation. And even the terrible things that happen are God's instruments that He uses for the benefit of mankind. Though we often do not see how God is using these terrible events, we can still trust Him. We may not know the end, but we know God. And if you are the child of God, you have the promise of God that He is working in every single situation for your good. He is working in every trial to make you more like Jesus. You can take comfort because the God who cares for His creation is still in control, even when things seem out of control. And because God is in complete control over all things, because God is a caring God who never stops loving His creation, the only response is to humble ourselves before God. The book of 1 Peter gives this exact instruction to a group of Christians who are being persecuted for their faith. There it says, God resisteth the proud and giveth grace to the humble. Humble yourself therefore under the mighty hand of God. In times of trouble, humble yourself before God. Submit to His rule, trust His care, and bow before Him. If you do that, you will find He will give you grace to carry you through. Often suffering leaves us with far more questions than answers. But I can assure you that if you will meditate on the truths of the character of God, you will find He is the answer you need. And if you have more questions, you can click the link on everlastingtruths.com to submit your questions.